Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance Podcast. Today we're talking athletic training and athletic qualities. So this is for just anyone that wants to move better and perform better, to even if you compete athletically on the field, team sports or individual, these are going to be 5 athletic qualities that you need to be training to be performing at your best.
Yeah, I think that athletic qualities often gets misunderstood. And when we say, like, obviously being an athlete is a different scenario, but having athletic qualities is kind of just more along the lines of, we think of them as human qualities. It's just qualities that everyone should be capable of. And also the athletic qualities, when we kind of think of them, are kind of like your ability to, like, it's move faster, like change direction really quickly, play your sport, really, like whether or not some athletes are actually not the most athletically gifted people, but they survive by knowing their game so well and being able to read play of the game. But when it actually comes to humans, like and people who train in the gym, we find that lots of training that isn't actually that athletic, and often there's not enough time spent on kind of qualities of tissue, like being able to jump, being able to like change direction, not everything being up, down, forward, back, a little bit more like moving to your left, moving to your right, being able to rotate is a really big one. And we find that these get left behind quite a lot with training, because the modern day kind of training is a bit more like, that's just lift heavy things off the ground in this kind of front, back, up, down kind of plane of movement.
I'd say like the 2 most popular modalities that most people think they need to do to get stronger is either like a powerlifting modality that James was alluding to then, or like a bodybuilding modality. And you're going to get some hypertrophy, you're going to get some strength out of there, 2 cool qualities, but there's so many more. And then it's very sport dependent, right? Like some of those qualities might not be what you need to lean on. You might need to be more bouncy. You might need to be more like the ability to express force and rotate and change direction. They might be qualities that you need more of. And a really important thing, if you know your game, or you know what you need, your attributes need to be to match that, you have to know what you're getting in your game, and then know what you need to get outside of your game. Hope that makes sense.
And without even, again, talking about the athlete, just the general human and athletic training, is the kind of the first things that you lose in your older age are not really your strength or your muscle mass. They are your power and your speed, right? Speed is going to be the biggest thing that you lose over time. So it's for the athlete, but it's also for the human being to be more athletic. And I think the sense of saying being more athletic just means you feel better in your body, right? Like you can run for a bus.
I hope that's not a barrier of entry, right? That's something we should all be aspiring to do and to train like, right? To be more athletic. And that means be strong, feel great, to move well, to have a nice, robust body that you can rely on to get the task done. And I hope that's not a barrier of entry for a lot of people. It's something we should aspire to do with our training and aspire to be like.
Yeah, and being strong and athletic, they're not mutually exclusive, right? They can work and coincide with each other. It's but you can touch on too much. Well, I say too much strength. Yeah, you can definitely. Most people, and like Mitch kind of just touched on, is some people for the sport don't want to get overly strong. Like you don't want to make a 100-meter runner the strongest dude in the world with their back squat and front squat, because they're going to get so tight and they're going to be unable to perform these kind of more athletic qualities. You probably want to feed them some rotation, some springiness, and some speed to get them to be able to be the best at what they can be.
This is a bit off script, but like it was really popular just recently. It was the Physical 100 on Netflix, the South Korean show. It had like all these different individuals of different athletic backgrounds, like powerlifters, strongman versus Olympic gymnasts versus like fitness influencers, and just lots of different training styles. They're all pretty fit individuals, and they're the highest echelon of their divisions.
Are you going to spoiler, Mitch? You're about to say?
Yeah, I will. Screw it. Spoiler. Let's go, baby. But what you can see there is someone that's hyper specialized in one modality. Yeah, they get the kick ass in whatever that contest was of what they've specialized in. But as soon as that powerlifter had to do some like aerobic fitness or some running, he got eliminated. See you later, mate. And those individuals that had like kind of dipped their toes in more pools and spent more time training different athletic qualities, well, they're the ones that survived more to the end. And the winner, spoiler, here it is, it was a CrossFitter, someone that's kind of played in all modalities. It's kind of done a bit of really like a lot of strength work, has played a lot of like aerobic endurance to aerobic outputs to alactic outputs, all different stuff. He won, and he won by a decent margin in the last one. And it was interesting to see those last like 4 or 5 body types that lasted at the end were all very similar body types and people of similar kind of like multitask backgrounds.
Yeah. He was a snowboarder, wasn't he, as well? He was a national snowboarder for his country, wasn't he?
I can't remember.
You just forget that. And
He's
a CrossFitter.
Use that label.
I'm pretty sure he was a snowboarder and a CrossFitter. Cool. So with that, we've talked about that. We kind of briefly touched on specificity and general training. And when you are looking at athletic qualities as well, or someone who plays a sport, and depending on the specific position that they play and what they might need in that position, and depending on the sport in a whole, what they play, and then looking at their archetype, you kind of most of the time want to feed into people like train what they do well really hard, but at the same time work on things that they don't often get. Like give them things that they don't get, and give them ability to move in ways that they might not always be able to move, but get the same outcome. And we discuss this a lot, and the truth is, it's like any good sporting technique is you want a variability, you want lack of variability of outcome, but you want a lot of variability in how they get that outcome. So they want to be able to produce the same result over and over again in many different ways. And Franz Bosch has a way of calling that fluctuators and attractors. So you have these kind of, the fluctuators are things that often change, and the attractors are the things that you kind of like do really well and keep the same. And most of the time in the gym is a place that we train the attractors, but we might feed in some kind of like variability or different way of doing something so that people can be the best at doing something. And it can be like doing like 3-4 different types of lunges can make you just generally really strong and really good at doing a general lunge.
And there's time and place in that in a season as well. Like if you have to compete and like you got to be your best at the game time, it's probably not the best time to be working on some new stimulus that the person hasn't really had exposure to before. So you will be doing a lot of things to just keep those qualities alive and keep that person where they need to be. But outside of season, it's free season, right? Like you can start working on those areas where you maybe have a few more deficits and start working on a bit more of these different variations and different variabilities that we can kind of start stimulating. So we are going to have to pick our timeline too and know what the individual can do and work backwards from there.
And that also depends on the sport, Mitch. Like, so for example, if I've got a sport that's extremely chaotic, well, I might feed them in their training some stuff that's not very chaotic and make them work on their position to produce power. And then when someone's got a sport that's not chaotic as well, then you might actually feed them in some chaotic movement outside of training to give them some variability. Especially like I often see you see the soccer players this a lot, and you'll see when they're actually in season that the type of training that they do isn't very specific at all. It's actually very unspecific, and they'll be doing like these kind of like Bosu ball stands and stuff like this. And this is a way to, the way I see it as well is, even though that Bosu balls and all these things, the instability training gets this really bad hype, I see it as a way as just like just feeding them in some movement, that's some really, really like low volume, low intensity movements. So they're just still moving throughout their training when they're getting all the stimulus for their sport from their sport. So outside of the sport, you don't need to feed them anymore in season. And when we do talk about out of season and in season, you're normally going to have a build up, and then just before you get to the actual competition, you've been very specific, and then you're going to taper off. So you're going to literally slightly drop off the intensity so they're ready and fresh for game day. And then it depends, like that in powerlifting, you're going to have to do something like that. But in sports, like in soccer and like in rugby and all these things during their season, then they might not be doing such specific stuff because you might just be feeding them movement throughout the season.
Some of these sports are unrelenting. Like I think like basketball, for example, like you might play 2 to 3 games in a week. Like there's not much you can throw on top of that individual. If they're playing to their max capability 3 times a week, that's a lot.
Is basketball the most? I think also
that's like the highest
baseball,
I can think
they do a lot, don't they?
Yeah,
like,
it's an unrelenting amount of games in a season. So it's, quite sport specified. But like you go back like powerlifting, like how many times you compete in a year? Like 4, 5? There's a lot of free time in between there to play around.
You pretty much got, like 4 or 5 months in between each contest. And there might be one contest that really is what means the most to you. Talking about athletic qualities, some things that actually just I don't believe really can be taught in the gym are going to be like your ability to read the game. You need game time to actually be able to read a game, right? To understand how your team, your players that you're playing with move, how your opposition play. That's going to have to be done watching videos, being in game, and maybe even talking to your coach.
Like game IQ.
Yeah, game IQ, 100%. And then your agility. Like I think often agility is very much misconceived, and it's thought of as kind of like your ability to run for a speed ladder, or how quickly you can kind of like move off the ground. But really, agility is the ability for you to take in external information, so what that person's doing right in front of you at this moment, and then react to it. And that might be a visual cue, like, oh, you see they drop their left shoulder, okay, well, they're going left, right? Or they lift their chest, and they turn to the right, oh, well, they're going to the right. Like, watching them kind of things and instinctively, not even like thinking about it, reacting to that person, that is what agility is. It could be, sometimes it's a visual cue, sometimes it's an audio cue. It can be that 100-meter runner like going off the spot from the gun, and there can also be like plenty of other environmental cues that you need to pay attention to. I think a really good, interesting one is like kind of American football and how you're reading things so far away in the game, but you have to read so much because it's so planned out and so crazy. Like in that sense, I do. It's not something I've ever played, but it's something that I really kind of admire for how they've changed that kind of game.
Like from a very superficial level, you're like, oh, here's these big, huge dudes running into each other. But really, there's so much more. There's body shapes, angles, different velocities that they're running at, block plays, decoys, sweeping plays. There's so much happening. And when you understand the game a little bit better, it's like you can see how much complexity goes in and how much you need to absorb in like a split second. Yeah. It's such a small amount of time to download information and then to counter it, to go, oh, shit. This is what's happening with the offensive line. This is what I need to do to penetrate, to make a tackle, or to do whatever I need to do. There's a lot of decision-making that needs to happen in a very small amount of time. And then that decision-making has to be translated into an athletic expression. You've got to make your body move and react to that decision.
And you got to move right? And then one of a really good book called I think it's called The Game Changer.
Yeah, that's the one.
I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but he spends the first 5 pages of the book, I think it is, talking about one single Tom Brady moment in a sport game, and he literally explains it to like the eye movement to the leg movement, and it's just like it's an epic read if you ever get a chance. And it kind of encapsulates what we're talking about right now, about how like it's that in-game movement just can't be trained in a gym, and that's why they're pretty time wasted most of the time. But it's also like if you look on Instagram and stuff like that, this is the stuff that gets the most likes. Oh, that looks so extremely.
Fergus Connolly.
Oh, Fergus Connolly. Yeah, that's it. Cool. Check that out, Fergus Connolly, The Game Changer. And it gets like on Instagram, we find that lots of people really get a lot of notification or lots of notice from posting up these very like attractive, like, oh, that looks really specific. But the sad thing is, in the gym, like the more specific it is, probably the more specific it looks, probably the less specific it is, right?
So yeah, playing the game. Sorry, I'm just getting caught up. Just looking at that book still. Playing the game, and like a lot of this decision-making stuff is just getting repetitions in, right? And talking, evaluating after, do things slow to do things fast. And like a speed ladder isn't necessarily going to make that decision-making prowess increase, right? It looks pretty fancy because the feet are moving pretty fast, but not much of that really translates to game day activities.
It's not chaotic enough. It's like you're getting to preempt the movement. You're getting to time your steps. You're perfectly trying to improve this one variable of training, and it probably never come up a point where you actually have to do that exact same step drill at that exact same moment with that exact same amount of time on each foot.
Yep.
So sadly, it's just when it looks really, really specific and it goes, ooh, that looks fun. It's probably actually a useless drill for yourself.
And in the athletic quality side, like there's stuff that just goes internally, like the brain, like the ability to be able to focus on this information, not let your headspace drift away, like to be present in the moment. Like I think sports is so good for headspace, right? Because you have to be in the moment. You have to be absorbing what's happening. If not, you might have a 120 kilo bloke run over you. So you have to kind of be in the moment. And to back yourself, to make good decisions. If you're indecisive on the field or on the mat or whatever your sport is, and you're second guessing yourself and you're fighting your own decisions, it never leads to a good outcome. So you've got to learn a bit of confidence and be able to back yourself. And that determination to follow through and to fight through to the last like bit of effort or the last bit of the game. So these like mental things like focus, confidence, determination, and like discipline, like to do whatever the game plan is or stick to your guns. Like there's quite a few mental things that you've got to be considering when you're playing your sport as well. And these are the unseen stuff.
Yeah, and like talking about them as well, like the ability when you're focusing is to focus on the right thing. And lots of that does come down to fatigue. All these things come down to your ability to not fatigue. Like when we fatigue and our brain is like, stop using so much energy, we very quickly end up relying on like cheaper pathways of movement, which can be normally this is very much shown, like this is how injuries occur most of the time. So just the ability to have a tank, right? And to be able to repeat movements over and over and over again. And the specific movements that we're talking about can be a game changer. Joel Jameson kind of coined this as dynamic energy control. And it's kind of the ability to control how much energy you use through a given time so that you are working hard, but you're not getting as out of breath as the other player, right? And lots of this comes down to developing the aerobic system to the most highest capacity you can, because the aerobic system is probably the system that's always running, but it's the system where once we get over, like, we think you can look at it as like, if you want to put a number on it, like 140, 150 beats per minute, then you're actually breaking into these other energy systems. But the aerobic system will recover really quickly, and you'll be able to go again and then go again. So the harder I can work in my aerobic system, the less time I need to recover, the better my focus, confidence, determination, discipline can be, and the more so that I can start seeing that other person get tired. But if I start stepping out of my aerobic system into other energy systems, I'm going to have to put my hands on my knees, I'm going to have to chill out, I'm going to have to, I might miss a play, right?
That's a huge point, man. And there's a saying here, like, fatigue makes cowards of us all, right? You're buggered. You're not going to be so committed to that tackle, or you're not going to be able to think about the situation as clearly, and errors sneak into our game no matter what it is.
Yeah, energy is both what you put out physically, but also what you put out mentally. So fatiguing is going to affect you in every part of your gameplay.
In the UFC, like mixed martial arts, there's a lot of fighters now that, like, their main attribute is they just have a tank on them. They can go all day. They might not be the best striker or the best wrestler or the best at jiu-jitsu or whatever it happens to be, but they can just go. And they're throwing so many things at their opponent that they're constantly reacting rather than being proactive. So, like, cardio, it can be weaponized on the field or in the ring or whatever it happens to be. And it just means that you can make decisions at a higher output because your heart rate's lower, you're calmer, you're clearer with your outputs. And, like, it also depends on the athlete. Some athletes are so explosive, if they have a bigger energy pool, they can have more repetitions of being explosive. Rather than having a super explosive individual that can only explode 2 or 3 times in a game, if they have a bigger tank, they could explode 6, 8, 9 times. And that might be what is needed to win the game, or to get them to get a higher contract or something of that nature. I can't really think of any scenarios where cardio isn't a super beneficial thing for someone to have, a big aerobic base.
So when we have our 5 athletic qualities that you might not be training in the gym, but you should be, cardio was not one.
Yeah, I think that's a popular one though, right?
But well, we believe it to be, right? That's why we didn't put it down as one. But I would say, like, overarching all these things, like, however much these other things come into play, your cardio is always going to be in the background and always needs to be finely tuned. And we talk about it all the time. It's like people limit their strength performance continuously with not doing cardio because they're so scared of how it affects their gains. Yeah. But the sad truth is that most people that not doing the cardio is actually what is affecting their gains.
What a shit stigma that's still about, right?
Yeah,
I can't believe that still kicks around. Yeah. Oh, it's going to kill my gains. No, bro.
And just for so many reasons as well. For the reason, one of the big reasons is, like, we're all very time poor, right? And if you can train for 3-4 times a week and you can only train for an hour, then, like, have you ever tried doing a big leg session with 4, 5, 6 exercises in a leg session and not getting gassed to have 4 or 5 minutes rest? Well, you do get gassed. So if you do some cardio on the off days, then when you do come and do legs, you'll be like, wow, I can actually put a mad more stimulus in my body. And
your recoverability will improve as well. So you can maybe get an extra session in your week if you have a better gas tank. And that compounds over the course of a long time, and you're actually getting more training volume in.
Yeah, well,
it's huge.
So we could talk about aerobic capacity all day long, but we won't.
Let's move on.
Just bear in mind, like, the back burner of all these things is having a good tank.
Yeah, doesn't matter how big, strong you are. If you can only run one play or half a play or whatever, like, good luck.
Yeah, and that showed in Physical 100, right? They showed the guy that actually has a bit of a tank from kind of CrossFit managed to, like, pursue with everything.
Yeah. Okay, I'll paint the picture. I'll go one more time here. So there was, like, these 2 dudes, and they had, like, this big, like, I don't know, like, rope that ties up ships. And it was a ridiculous amount of meterage of rope. And it's in these big, like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like big cylinder things. So they had to pull it out. They're in this, like, hinged position, pulling it. And the guy, like, the show leads you to it. Like, you think this guy's going to win because he's bigger and stronger and that sort of stuff. And the dude gasses out 2 ways through. And he literally does not have the gas tank to pull the rope anymore. The guy that was, like, going a bit lower with his energy systems and pacing himself, and obviously had a better tank, he just slowly overtook him. About halfway through like the effort, he's still getting meterage on each pull that he gets. And the other guy's just, he literally cannot pull anymore. Completely exhausted, has nothing left in his tank. So cardio won that one.
Yeah, and it does often. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so cool.
See, cardio.
So first of all, one of our 5s is hips over knees, right? And I think of hips over knees as 2 things, like being able to have your knee in a position and then bring your hip forward and over. And I also think about like you actually utilizing your hips as a priority over utilizing your knees, right? So you mentioned this the other day, Mitch. It's like making sure your knees are acting as knees and your hips are acting as hips, and not having knees that act as hips. I'm going to try and paint you a little bit of a picture with this. And a good way to do it is kind of thinking about performing a squat. And we see it often. We just talk about back squat because it's a very easy thing to picture in your head. But we see people go down with a back squat and they have this nice bar path. And then when they come up, what they do is the first thing they do is they instantly pull their knees back, which lifts their bum up, which then pushes all the weight forward on their center of mass. So they have to go into their heels and they just lose their drive up. And the muscles that are supposed to be working just don't specifically work as well as they should. So we become a lot more low back. People would consider it more bum, but it's not really more bum, and it's definitely a lot less knees. And that's funny to believe, isn't it? It's actually pulling my knees back fast at the bottom is actually less knees. Well, because my knees pull back so fast that there's not actually much load on them for very long. Yep, and the direction of force isn't equal to actually the direction that I'm moving my knees. So what we tend to find is it's much better if we have this kind of line of extension, and this transfers to everything athletic as well. We have this kind of like this proximal to distal extension, so that when I'm running, my foot hits the ground slightly in front of my center of mass, my hip drives forward over that, my knee will pull back slightly but not completely lock out, so then I can actually get a push with more of my hip than my actual ankle. So I go hip extension, knee extension, and then ankle extension. And I think this is probably one of the most, like you're going to hear triplet extension all the time when you look up athletic qualities. And I don't think of it as triple extension. I think of it as triplet extending. And I think the timing of it is really important. It's like your hip has to extend, then your knee, then your ankle. And you have to make sure that you don't go into the complete extension of all 3. And in sprinting, one of the reasons that that really, really messes you up is that what tends to happen is that my swing leg recovery, which means that when I hit one leg out in front of me, my leg behind me spends so long on the ground that it takes ages to come back out in front of me again, which keeps me spending more time on the ground, makes me way less efficient, drops the distance that I can actually, my length of stride, which is such an important factor in sprinting. So there's so many reasons why you want to train hips over knees.
And that's something you can implement straight away today. Like if you're doing a gym session, you can just film yourself and you can watch that sequencing as you come out of that pattern, and you can see what happens between the ankle, knees, and the hips, and that sequencing pattern. So as James has said, you'll see the hip come through, then the knee come through, and then through the ankle. Like you can actually watch that in real time. And remember, bones act, muscles react. So the skeletal position will dictate what muscles are actually taking up strain and load. So if you want to get what you want to get out of the position, you've got to have that kind of right skeletal representation. And if that sequencing is a bit off, you probably won't get the adaptation you're after. So it's just something to factor in mind, but it's something super usable that you can implement into your training like ASAP.
Yeah, and you can implement into your training with tons of different exercises. Like I would probably not start off doing bilateral exercises like your barbell squats to do it.
For point 3.
Oh,
no.
Yeah,
we're coming into that later.
No, don't jump ahead. And I'd more so look into doing like a lunge position or something like that, and even something where we call it a Hatfield lunge, where you can kind of grab onto something for some support, and you can kind of track your knee as far forward as you go down, and then just delay the knee extension on the way up. So it doesn't mean you don't straighten out the knee. It just means that you slow down the knee extension and put him back in straight, and you drive the hip up and over the top of that front leg. And the cool thing about it is you're going to get loads more quad stimulus. Like you'll be like, this is how I grow my quads. And you'll also get way more glute stimulus. So you'll be like, oh, actually I'm working everything. The one thing you will lack on is you will lack on a bit of low back stimulus, which is normally for most people a good thing.
Another favorite that we use in here is like a bent knee RDL. Is that like soft bend at the knee and then sitting through the hip into that hinge position, keeping that soft bend at the knee and then bringing the pelvis back underneath. It's wicked if you haven't given it a go. It's like highly recommend it. maybe we'll try and film some of this and chuck it in a separate video underneath.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And a cool thing about anything athletic is there's two kind of properties of muscles that are really important. And one is kind of the force length of a muscle, and then one is the kind of the length velocity, or the force velocity of a muscle. So a force length of a muscle is when the muscle can create the most amount of force, and at what lengths it can create the most amount of force. Well, the glute muscles aren't actually the most elastic muscle in the body. They're actually very not elastic. They're actually very dense muscles. So they love some time to drive forward, and they can create a ton of force if they're given that time, right? And the other thing about the glutes the glutes as well, is that they with that time they want to actually the other thing with the quads as well is the quads want the same kind of thing, right? Even though the quads do have that kind of really like elastic connection into the tendons of the knee, if I can slow down my knee extension, then I got this way more time for my glutes to drive forward. And that's predominantly like how they like to work. They want time to build up as much force as possible, and they can build up a lot of force when given that time. And the thing is with having these kind of straight knee positions and loading very straight knee positions, that's completely fine. But when we're actually creating a ton of load through the legs, we're going to have to start bending the knees more anyway. So I tend to find that people like to lock out their knees as a kind of like energy efficient way of doing a squat or a lunge. Like, how quickly can I get my knees straight because it's going to be super energy efficient? Well, in the gym and on the field, you don't want to be that energy. You want to be energy efficient with the most powerful possible position. So you want to be able to repeat very powerful things over and over again. You don't want to train yourself to be energy efficient biomechanically. You want to be energy efficient cardiovascularly, and then be able to produce a lot of power for your muscles. Did that make sense?
Yeah, man. That sounds pretty damn athletic.
Yeah, cool. Okay, as long as it sounded athletic.
That's all that matters, really. Any more on hips and knees, or knees being knees and hips being hips?
I think that's definitely something that needs a video, like you said, Mitch.
Yeah, man.
To kind of put that in visually for people. But
it's a smoky if you haven't ever done that before. If you feel like that's you, it's a challenge, man. But once you get it, holy shit, the stimulus is fantastic.
Yeah, it's like it makes your glutes work so much more, because your glutes are in the position where they actually can contract, rather than when I lock one more thing to think about is when I lock my knee back and pull my knee completely straight. And the faster that I do that, the faster my pelvis rolls forward over the knee. So the second my pelvis rolls forward over the knee, I'm actually going to lose the ability to contract my glutes, and it's going to be low back for days. And you can see it in runners. When you see back-to-back runners that actually delay the knee bend versus the runners that actually lock out their knee faster, you can see the guy that doesn't extend their back too much. Yeah, because you're going to extend your back, but you want a nice amount of it to control your position, and you want the glutes to be working. So you see the difference between the guy working his glutes, using his glutes to run, which the muscles definitely developed for that, and the guy using way more low back.
I just think squatted running and how horrible and how hard squatted running is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's another bloody of a challenge.
For that exact reason.
Point number 2, spinal movement. Move your damn spine. It's how we're designed and have evolved to move. The spine is a very mobile structure, and it kind of dictates a lot of the function and movement from the rest of our limbs as well. A spine that has more freedom of movement has more freedom of options and more ways to generate force and power. So there's a lot of things, a lot of subcategories to go into this, but kind of what we're talking about is develop a mobile structure with strength through it. It's a very robust, awesome tool to have in your pocket.
I think in the athletic kind of field of training and kind of like on the social media sides of things, we see a lot of like, oh, that's create stability, oh, that's create this anti-rotation, because a lot of sport and lots of running is we're trying to resist the rotation, and to some level, yeah, that's completely correct. But to the other side of things is that we actually should be moving our spine a lot, and the spine does work as a massive ability to to produce and transfer force from like one limb to the other. And people tend to think that that's a very like static movement, but it's not. It's more like a whip. There's actually movement going down and through the spine when that happens. So we want to be able to capture that movement through the spine. And while we definitely want some muscles to actually reduce and limit rotations, there's actually definitely a certain amount of rotation that we want to get through the spine. And when looking at the spine from this kind of like anatomical point of view, we can see the joints are very different up the spine. And you have these kind of like your lumbar spine, which is your low back, these bigger, heavier vertebrae. They have more of an axis for this kind of like front back movement. So they actually flex forward more and they extend forward and back more. And then you go a little bit higher and you've got kind of the low rib cage spine. Well, that's actually suited perfectly. Not saying they don't all do the same different things as well, but that low kind of rib cage spine is developed more to have some side bending, and then your more upper spine and your neck are developed a lot more to have like this kind of more rotation. And you definitely want to prioritize on look at them where the spine should be moving and give the spine that moving there as well as throughout the whole spine, right?
This whole thing's like integrated. When you look at the spine and then the movement of the spine from like the head to the tip of the pelvis, the sacrum, also talking about the foot, talking about the thigh, talking about the hands, the arms movement as well. I like to think like someone throwing a punch like a real cool boxer. As they go to load, it's not just the arm punching, it's pivots from that foot. The foot pivots, the whole thigh starts to drop inwards, the pelvic rotates over, and all that force is being generated from the foot to the thigh to the pelvis, then through my torso rotates, and then I extend and I punch through my hand. And all that force is generated, like James said, through that whip effect, through that lower body, rotating through and then punching. Another way to think of this, I'll give you another one, if punching's not your scene, think like a golf swing. Golf swing, same sort of thing, right? I'm having that big wind-up phase through my lower body, I have that slight staggered position. As I rotate again, I'm winding up, I'm whipping through my foot, through my thighs, through my pelvis, through my torso, and then when I hit, I smack the ball at maximal force production, then I follow through and my spine rotates all the opposite direction. There's so much movement there. But I want to give you one more counter. There are some times in some sports where stiffness and like lack of movement is needed. Now, not the perfect example, like powerlifting's too easy to go to, but like think like what's rings? Is it rings in gymnastics?
Yeah, I think it's called rings.
They're so stable, they're on there, the arms are out at the side and there's absolutely no movement, they're stiff as all hell. Like there's still movement required, but the ability to resist movement is also a skill in a lot of sports as well. So again, sport dependent a lot of the time.
I like how you gave the golfer analogy specifically for the pacifists. I love it. And like Mitch was saying, like, that whip is super important. Like, so what actually happens down that whip is when I push through the ground, all of my joints are going to have this kind of equal directional rotation, but they're all going to rotate at this kind of lesser degree up, and that's what or this greater degree up, sorry. And then what actually is going to happen there is it's going to be a contributing force through every single joint. But what we tend to find is we actually, when we limit these rotations too much so, that actually what we do is we limit our ability to create force up that chain. And that's why we put spinal movement down as like it's such a big one. And I think one of the biggest core exercises, which I think is a little bit of a joke, that this is one of probably the most popular core exercise, is planks. Planks for core. Like the idea of plank is you're resisting one thing. You're resisting some extension. So you're resisting extension through the body. And the idea is actually, what actually happens with most people is we tend to, first off, we do the planks pretty poorly. Secondly, it's an isometric position where we tend to flex too much. And most people don't need that much movement in that plane already. So it's like I would swap a side plank for a plank every day of the year. I would also I like making planks more dynamic. So it's kind of like the idea of being in a plank, but having something to drag through. So you have to rotate. Even the ability to lift your hips up and drop back into a position to capture that position. I think the one thing planks are really used for is teaching a stack or teaching the ability in that spinal position to have your head over your rib cage and over your pelvis. So
I think this spine moving in all directions, like a low key, like under hero, like a low key hero is like flexing. Is like crunching or
flexing is a flex.
Yeah, so I think like the body coming in together, like gar hammers are a nasty core drill. Like their crunches have their place and can be absolutely fantastic. Other cool things, side bending and rotating are awesome ways to kind of load the torso. And some core movements suit individuals a little bit better than others. Some people need to go and kind of have work more on the obliques and kind of get those areas working on, and other people need to be working on some different variations, like more of those flexing drills, working more the TVA and that sort of stuff. So you can get more hyper-specified, but these are just underutilized ways to get your core to move as just general principles.
Yeah, and there's always trade-offs. There's like stiffness and mobility, for example. It's like you can train and become too stiff, and you can train and become a bit too mobile. And you kind of want the best of both worlds, and you definitely want certain sections of the body to be able to move the way that nature was intended. Cool. We've better move on.
Point 3. It kind of ties in a little bit too.
Oh yeah, we've briefly touched on this, and we won't touch on it too long. But Mike Boyle was the one, and he still gets stick to this this day. Is he's kind of like, no bilateral training. But we love bilateral training because it's such an amazing expression of like force and especially strength. Like you can move some serious weight because you've got two legs on the ground. You're freeing up again. This one, you're taking away the rotation when you're doing a bilateral exercise. So you have to resist the rotation. And then you have kind of like your single leg exercises, which whereas you might not be as strong, you'd be surprised how strong you can be on one leg versus two legs. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence to show that you can be 75% as strong on one if you take away the lack of stability. Like we mentioned earlier, that exercise where you kind of hold on to something, we call it a Hatfield squat or a Hatfield split squat. But actually, like there's a lot of evidence to show that people, when it comes to power and the ability to produce force quickly rather than slowly, actually, well, your jump can be higher with one leg than it can be with two legs.
And cool, like every like unilateral movement is going to have a more degree of rotation than a bilateral drill. So like all movement is rotational, and to have rotational qualities still kicking alive and moving and be able to train strength qualities and get some more movement aspect out of the position, it's a win-win. If you're a field sport athlete that has to move and change direction and create force and move in different planes, well, this can be a real winner. If your training looks a lot like two legs that never move or come out of position, adding some unilateral stuff and giving that some shine, it can be absolutely awesome. It can free up your movement, make you feel a bit better, and your strength will not drop off that much at all. If anything, you'll probably find a real positive impact to giving unilateral some love.
Yeah, and like Mitch just mentioned, it's like no sport is actually single-legged. Well, I don't think so. There probably is some sports that are. But most sports are unilateral, and it's like a one arm this, one arm that. And even when you're using two, and it looks like you're using two, you're gonna take advantage of kind of these natural gait mechanisms where you're kind of pushing off one leg more to get that rotation through the two legs. It is really just kind of like your basic like barbell exercises that resist. There's still rotation going on, guaranteed, but they resist rotation to the greatest degree, and you get best at them by resisting rotation. So there's a lot of reasons why people like Franz Bosch, who's really big in the kind of athletic training scene, and has some amazing books where he talks about like no barbell lifts for his athletes.
It's such a shame. Like Mike Boyle, like praise to him. He was like very innovative with this idea. I reckon he put a lot of shine on it. But like people then crap on him because he just like kind of, I don't know, maybe said some controversial things in the later years that discounts all the good work he did earlier.
Yeah, I think it's when
really
people
awesome.
go maybe too far sometimes, where they actually be like, I'm hurting people who love the barbell's feelings by saying I never barbell lift or I never do bilateral exercises and I only do unilateral exercises. But I would say that if I had an option with an athlete and I had two options and I said, okay, well, I can only bilaterally squat this guy and hinge this guy, and I can only use barbell exercises with two legs side by side. And I have this other group of athletes where I'm only allowed to do single leg exercises, but I guaranteed I'm only choosing single leg exercises for my athletes if I had to cut out one. So there you go. Like
unilateral for the win, man.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is just in lower body. I think we already touched on this, but this is upper body stuff. This is like old, like you could think like a bench press being with dumbbells and just using one hand to reach through, or one stays static as the other one starts to move. And you're going to get so much more movement out of that, like a substantial amount through the torso.
Or two dumbbells, but offset. Like, so one dumbbell's heavier than the other dumbbell, and it doesn't have to be to a great degree. It can be over time. But, like, these things just will add rotation into your body, and depending on where your legs are, and you can really organize this stuff to give people some real quality movement back.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Highly underrated. I love it. Personally, I reckon my training's probably like a good 70, 80% worth of unilateral work. And I've seen no major drop-offs in strength rather than being super bilateral orientated maybe in years past.
And the thing is the only reason I'm going to really use a bilateral exercise for my training specifically is to actually just like challenge some full out strength, right? I'm just going to give myself all that stability. I'm going to challenge my strength maximally. But even when it comes to like hypertrophy, to some level, I'm going to use like a dumbbell over a barbell, or I'm going to use single leg stuff, right? Quite often. So yeah, 100%. I think like 75% of my training is probably single leg these days, or single arm. Yeah, good.
Cool. Moving on.
Yeah, I said for the one issue with single arm work and single leg work is it's time. It takes double the amount of time. And it actually gets you a little bit more out of breath as well because you have to work twice the amount.
And one thing to add to this, like the body is naturally asymmetrical. Like you will have a side that's more dominant than the other, and that's completely fine. And this is a great time to give a bit of shine to a side that maybe needs a little bit more love. But it's nothing wrong with you. It's absolutely fine to be a little bit different with our strength levels and how we can load up into one side versus the other. Completely normal.
There is a lot of evidence out there to shine on, like to kind of say that if you have a discrepancy of 15+%, which is just like a bit of an arbitrary number that they've tried to accrue out of all this information, that you can be at higher risk of injury. But I'd say probably you have that not because of strength. That's probably more of a movement and biomechanical issue that's actually creating that strength deficit. So you'd want to look at it from more of a biomechanical standpoint than you want to look at it from a strength standpoint. But I also massively think that in most sports, people would do well by actually just not limiting their strong side by their weak side and just getting as brutally strong on one side as possible. Like if you're someone who punches mostly with your right, then train that right side to be as strong as possible. Don't go, oh, my right side's getting too much stronger than my left. I have to spend more time on my left. No. Just try and catch the left up as much as possible, but keep training that strong dominant side.
Oh, yes. Number 4.
Ooh, nice.
Bro, plyometrics, jumping, bounding, hopping. It's awesome. All sport, like pretty much all sports are built off this, and it's so underused.
Yeah, 100%. Like, so muscles, we often way overuse muscles in this kind of like slow, constant range of motion. And this is my argument for not always using full ranges of motion as well. It's kind of like what we tend to see people do is like, oh, you must squat full depth to be athletic. You must be able to squat arse the grass. Yeah, you must be able to do all these full ranges of motion. Well, why this can be amazing for building muscle mass, it's actually not the best option for being athletic, right? So when we actually do most things that there's one thing we call the strength shortening cycle, which is the ability to put elasticity into a movement when we drop and then come up and be nice and explosive on the backside of it. And you find that some people that are overly strength trained, well, they have to go down and they have to take the slack out of the movement. They have to go deeper and deeper and deeper to take the slack out of the movement, to recruit that stretch shortening cycle, to then jump back up and be explosive. And one of the issues with that is that that's not fast. Right, if I'm playing a game and I have to get up into the air faster than someone else to get to the ball, or I have to get up faster than someone else to put a ball in a hoop for basketball, well, I want to be the guy that can just like drop like a cat. You know, I want to take the slack out of my muscles, catch that stretch shortening cycle, and then pop back up. I love this test. This is a fantastic test. If you get one person, put them up against the wall, and you say to them, squat down, pause for 4 seconds at the bottom, and then jump back up, and you just count how high they jump. Okay, then you get the same person, give him a few seconds after that big maximal jump. You tracked how high he jumped when he squatted and paused, and then you make him drop and pop as fast as he can. 2 things of information you want from there is how long it took him to drop and pop, and then secondly, how high he jumped in relationship, in contrast to the other jump. Well, if I've got a guy that dropped slow, paused, then jumped up, and he jumped higher with the pause, then that guy is strength orientated and he might want to catch us way more athletic plyometric capabilities. Where if I got a guy that jumps with a stretch shortening cycle higher, that's probably what you should expect from most people. So he's probably like, okay, well, we might make you stronger depending on your kind of traits at the moment.
You know what's really cool too about this? It can be quite energy conservation. Like someone that uses more tendon orientated strategies, a lot of that energy is for free and we get a lot of that energy back. So a jump versus someone that's a bit more bouncy naturally and can wind up and load on those tendons versus someone that needs to load up through a muscular strategy, the individual that's more tendon orientated is spending way less energy versus the one that's using the muscular strategy. And it's going to be like a quicker reaction time as well. So there's so much athletic, plus side to having that more elastic driven strategies when you need to hop, bound, jump, or whatever it happens to be. It's and very trainable. Like there's so many ways to scale this kind of stuff to someone that's never really done it, that's very muscular and very stiff and doesn't have these qualities. You can start off with very low level integration 2 to 3 times a week, and this stuff can be captured pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, well, quickly for how important it is as well. I find that what happens with a lot of people is that they don't do anything that is in remotely athletic, and they might train in the gym, but then they just decide to add this high volume of running into their lifestyle. And running is definitely a plyometric. Like when we actually pick up speeds, like walking, we spend a fair amount of time on 2 legs. But once we start actually running, it's kind of like that's what makes it really running. It's like you're on 1 leg most of the time. Well, it's not actually what makes it running, but for now we'll say that's what makes it running. But you're actually on 1 leg more than you're on 2 legs. And the idea is that actually what's happening now is that I'm actually doing some plyometrics in a sense. Well, even though I'm spending a long time on the ground, the faster I run, the more explosive I have to be, the more I have to recruit these tendons. And if these tendons have not been developed through some lower grade stuff first, this is where you get people go, now I've got this kind of plantar fasciitis, I've got this Achilles tendon pain, I've got this patella tendon pain, because I just haven't trained my tendons thing. And the cool thing is, like Mitch saying, there's so many ways to dose this. And isometrics can be the way forward for most people, because isometrics is this thing that happens called tendon creep. So what actually happens when I put a muscle in a position where it stays in that position for long enough, then my tendon's actually going to learn to stretch on an isometric muscle. So it can be like your introduction to plyometrics can be isometrics. And then from isometrics, you can start being low-level plyometrics.
So brutal, dude. Maximal isometrics are like, they're emotional.
Yeah. And like the guy, he's popularized it now as Alex Natera. He's worth a look up. And he's got these things called, I can't remember what they're called actually. They are running specific isometrics. And he's got a really good thought process behind it for the sense that what actually happens is that when we're running, we create 10 times, like it's about 5 to 10 times our actual body weight in force coming down on us. We can't even replicate that with anything in the gym. No one can lift 5 to 10 times their body weight in strength. So then what we can do is that we actually imagine the forces that we're allowing our tissues to handle by adding in some plyometrics, adding in some fall-in, adding in some isometrics with some heavy load. It's actually quite amazing. It can really change your body, and that is such a massive added to feeding athletic in your body.
Not much time needed. Like, I find people that whinge about plyometrics, but yet we'll go out on the piss and then bounce and jump around for like 3 hours on, 4 hours on end. Like,
yes.
But I won't do like 3 sets of 15 pogos or whatever it happens to be. Wait a minute, you just did many hours of that.
Yeah. It's like you with your hand up over your head.
Good
so
stuff.
like like training these tissue qualities, but also training the kind of like bouncy qualities, these elastic qualities are extremely important.
Cool. Just from a time sense, we're going to have to shift on to number 5, but plyometrics deserve more shine. There could be a whole potty on this because they are such a great subcategory to drive into. They're like, not just athletic individuals, just humans should be doing this. Like the tendons getting some shine is so important.
And last one, which we'll try and run through because again, we're quite time poor, like power, speed. So when we look at like this kind of continuum of training, on one far end, we're going to have this kind of maximal strength. And on the very other end, probably when it comes to these kind of strength qualities, we're going to have speed, right? And the big difference there is rate of force, right? When I'm doing a squat, I'm creating the most amount of force possible because I have a long time to produce it. So then I can create this really, really high force output. But when it comes to actual speed work, which kind of sits on one end of the spectrum, it's kind of that more plyometric stuff. What you have to do is you have to recruit elastic capabilities because they will make you move fast. But you also have to get off the ground as quickly as possible. And you have to create a lot of force in a very little time to be good at speed. Well, in the middle sits power, right? And we play around with power because you can have strength power and you can have power strength. It's like where it's a bit more strengthy than it is power and it's a bit more powery than it is strength. And you can have speed power and power speed, right? Well, when we're talking like specifically power, it's kind of like we kind of sit in between like, oh, can you create this force within 0.5 to 0.8 seconds, and can you create a nice powerful force in that time, right? And I don't think that's trained very often at all for athletes. And really like being able to produce speed, power, and strength are just all of the most important things when it comes to training. Like you don't want to just be getting strong and having to create force over long periods of time. You want to be able to try and train to create force, very high amounts of force in more limited times.
And the coolest thing, it just teaches different strategies. And if you have more strategies that you can use for a certain situation that pops up, then you can use the best strategy to match it. And sometimes that strategy is you might need to be more forceful, but you need a longer time to express that force. And other times you might have to express force as quick as you can, but it won't be as much as force if you needed more time to build up into it. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think it made perfect sense.
And there's like, I think we've talked about this a couple of times, but there's ways to measure this, and a lot of this is velocity-based training. But even just to the eye, does this look pretty fast, or am I moving this weight with a bit of intent? You can change the whole velocity profile of what you're actually doing. So there's without like a tracking device, you can still get a pretty decent stimulus, but it's changing your focus and your intent, or having a friend or a coach give you a bit of feedback and go, yep, that's the right percentage of weight, and that's looking pretty damn fast.
And where in plyometrics we speak about tendon qualities and obviously the muscle qualities that tie in with tendon qualities. Well, with power speed, that you've got to talk about kind of the muscle qualities there as well. Some muscles are actually developed to not create these slow drags of force through large ranges of motion. Like calves definitely are. If you look at the architecture of calves, they are not designed to create force over long periods of time. And if you've ever done a bunch of calf raises, you can kind of feel they just shut down, right? They just, like we see.
15 done.
Yeah,
See you later.
100%. So what you're going to find is that the way that the muscles are striated is in a position to actually create force in a very short amount of time. And there's plenty of muscles. The hamstrings are like that as well. There's lots of muscles that rely more on elasticity and force quickly than they rely on dragged out slow force production, because the human body was designed to be more athletic than how we train it most of the time. So what you're going to do is you're going to capture these kind of powerful, we're going to weaponize, like Mitch used earlier, I love that. You're going to weaponize certain muscles that do not get used enough in your certain other types of training.
Kind of like guarantee, if you review these principles and you start going, okay, what does my training look like now if I take on a couple of these qualities, or ideally all of them, man, I kind of guarantee you're going to have more tools in your toolbox to perform better. And this is like, we've thought about this from a universal standpoint, not just as in a field sport athlete, a combat athlete, or an individual like a golfer or whatever you have, tennis, whatever. These are going to transfer and you're going to get some really good outcome.
Yeah, and this is so easy to incorporate, right? Like, so from now on, when you do some of your leg exercises, you're going to do like your hips over knees when you do them, right? Mm-hmm. When you add in your single arm, single leg exercises, hips over knees with the legs, you're going to add more. You're going to do more single arm than double. But you might start on a double. You might warm up with some plyometrics, because that's also going to benefit you actually warming up your central nervous system and getting excited. You're going to do maybe your prime lift with some speed or power work, where you're going to move it fast before you go into your max strength work. So you can still get everything you already get, but you can add these things in. And then you just think the last one is the spinal movement. Now, when you do your core now, like we call them Copenhagen drops, is where you lift your legs on the side of the bench. You do this Copenhagen position, like in a side plank. You drop your side abs into the biggest stretch possible, and you come back up. They are brutal, and you will feel your side abs for days. And just like bring in your crunches back, like get rid of your planks, but like put exercises like that in there.
Holy shit, it's super usable.
Oh yeah, it is.
God damn it.
And I think what we will do on the back end of this is we will write up a little program and give some exercise examples.
So look down in the description. I'll put a link out to some, you can see some visuals and kind of integrate this into your own training. Been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.